Good morning from the French Alps. After 7 days of rain, the storm's finally cleared. We've already got snow on the mountains, so that means it's the time of year when we look forward to next year's Etape du Tour, and what an absolute monster it is from Bourg D'Oisans to the summit of Alpe D'Huez. I think, to be honest, this is the toughest Etape du Tour that I've ever seen. The good news for the first time in many years is that the logistics of the 2026 Etape du Tour are fairly simple. There's no buses to worry about, and the start line is just roll down the hill from Alpe D'Huez. If it's your first Etape du Tour, I've put together a guide for that, and there's a link to it in the description down below. Before we get into the Etape du Tour 2026 preview, a quick heads up. This video is in collaboration with Adrian Timmis, Olympian, 1987 Tour de France finisher. That's Adrian on the right, climbing Alpe D'Huez in the 87 Tour. Today, Adrian specialises in coaching, mentoring and bike fitting, and over the coming months, I'm hoping we'll be doing some rides, chats and insights together. If you want to check out his super impressive palmares or get in touch with him, there's a link with all the details in the description below. So let's take a close look at the Etape du Tour 2026. So the 170 kilometre route takes in 3 hors category climbs: the Col de la Croix de Fer, the Col du Galibier and the Col de Sarenne. Add in the first category, Col de Telegraphe, a kick in the teeth ramp on the descent of the Croix de Fer, and the final undulations on the Sarenne descent. It all adds up to a whopping 5,400 metres of climbing. With footage from the Marmotte Granfondo, which mirrors quite a large portion of the route of the 2026 Etape du Tour. If you have been disappointed not to get an entry to the Etape, I would certainly consider the Marmotte Granfondo as a great alternative, which does include the 21 bends of Alpe D'Huez. So here we are at the start line in Bourg Doisans, but before we set off, we need to get to the start line. So many riders will be descending from Alpe D'Huez down to Bourg Doisans, as there's lots more accommodation up on the mountain than there is in the valley. Just a note of caution, the Marmotte Granfondo normally has between 5,000 and 7,000 riders, many of which are descending down from Alpe D'Huez down to the start in Bourg Doisans. We've seen many Marmotte rides ruined over the years with mechanicals and incidents on the way down to the start in Bourg Doisans. Now, looking at the Etape du Tour with 16,000 riders, of course it's going to be a lot busier on that descent on the morning of the Etape. Even in July it could be a chilly morning. We've seen riders with bin bags on, those CSI white suits or even old jumpers just to get down to the start and then to ditch that before the flag drops. So rolling out from Bourg Doisans, it's a flat, fast and no doubt full gas start towards Alamon. There's some road furniture on this section with roundabouts to negotiate and a sweeping right turn. Through Alamon village, and this is the first climb of the day, but it's not the Croix de Fer. It's just the road that climbs up the reservoir dam wall. It's a 27.6 kilometre climb to the summit of the Croix de Fer at an average gradient of 4.7%. The summit's at 2,067 metres, but don't be fooled by the 4.7%, as that does seem to include the descents that we'll come on to in a minute. Now, the secret to success in this Etape du Tour, as it is in the Marmotte, is pacing on the Croix de Fer. It's one of those situations where you shouldn't get carried away in the moment. Now, the first section of the Croix de Fer is up to the tiny village of La Rivière d'Alamon. It's only 5.6 kilometres with an average gradient of 8%, but it does top out at 10%. On the right here in the village, there is a water fountain that I've used many times. After the village, the road flattens out and then the Croix de Fer descends for around 3 kilometres before this danger point where the road swings to the right over a bridge and then immediately ramps up to over 10%. This is the steepest part of the Croix de Fer. It maxes out at 13.4%. However, it does get easier the closer we get up to the second dam. And as you can see here, this guy on the right has shipped his chain. Just a quick tip here, you'll be riding on closed roads, so use all of the road. This guy in the red on the right looks way fitter than me, however look how much distance I gain for no effort by cutting across the switchback. Skirting the edge of the second reservoir, there's another short downhill, and on a clear day you can start to see the summit of the climb and you'll likely hear the marmottes in the distance. Eventually you'll pass the Col de Glandon junction on your left. The Glandon summit is literally 220 metres around the corner. The Etape du Tour route temporarily leaves the Marmotte Granfondo course here, and the Croix de Fer swings to the right and up to the summit in another couple of kilometres. The famous Croix de Fer, the Iron Cross, is on the left at the summit. There's also a mountain refuge that's open in the summer, and in previous etappes there's been a feed station on the right here. Now let's just reflect on the Croix de Fer, and to break it down into 3 sections, so at least psychologically it doesn't look like the monster climb that it actually is. So on paper the Croix de Fer is 27.6 kilometres to the summit, but if we look at this slide we can break it down into 3 somewhat easier sections. 5.6 kilometres up to the first village, a 3 kilometre descent, then we climb again up to the second dam, descend a bit more, and then up to the Croix de Fer summit. So at least on paper it does look that little bit easier than it actually is. Over the top, the first section of the descent is quite technical and narrow, heading down to Saint-Solin-d'Arve. There's a water fountain in this village. It's just in front of the mairie, the town hall. You might have used this one in the 2022 Etape du Tour when you were climbing this section. I'll put a pin for this in the description below. Once you're through the village, whilst the road is fairly narrow, there is nothing too technical. However, once you pass the Col de Mollard junction, the road does climb again before the final part of the descent to Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne. Through Saint-Jean-de-Maurienne, and we're out onto the main road towards Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne and the bottom of the Col de Telegraphe. Now it's always a headwind here and the valley temperature can be well into the 30s on this section. My advice is to make sure that you're in a group to do some wheel sucking. If you find yourself in no man's land on your own, I would consider slowing up and waiting for the next group to catch you up so you can save some energy. Through Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne and the road turns sharp right to the foot of the Col de Telegraphe. But just before the bridge here there's a water fountain that I've used previously. It's one of those green ones that you spin the top. There's also toilets just behind where the arrow is pointing. Onto the Col de Telegraphe. This is the easiest climb of the day. Although it's 12 kilometres long, it averages just 6.8% and summits out at 1,566 metres above sea level. I can't add much to this climb. It's very steady, and as we get near to the summit, this is the old telegraph station on the right here, and there could well be a water stop at the summit, as there usually is in the Marmotte. On the descent, it's a wide, non-technical 5 kilometre descent down to Valois, and you only lose about 100 metres in altitude, so it's time to eat, drink and spin the legs out before we reach the bottom of the Galibier. Now, there is a danger point here in Valois as you meet these cobbles in the centre of the village. There's usually bidons flying everywhere, and you can see the camera slip in here. We all know that YouTube, a logarithm only works when you hit the like and subscribe button. So if you have found this video useful, I'd really appreciate your support by considering subscribing to the channel. And also I will be documenting my journey to the Etape du Tour start line in 2026, and I'll be uploading fortnightly during the winter months. Immediately after the cobbles, the road swings round to the left and then over a bridge. This is the start of the Col du Galibier. Now, the road does ramp up out of the village and it does reach 10% in places. And in previous Marmottes, and also I think the 2011 Etape du Tour, there was a feed station on the left here as you were leaving Valois behind. I'd check for feed stations on the official Etape du Tour website closer to the time. but in front of you you've now got 17 kilometres to the summit of the Galibier at an average gradient of about 6%, to the summit at 2,641 metres above sea level. Now there are some sections of the climb that are much steeper and reach 10 and 11%. The road drags up past Valois Golf Course and through this stunning valley where you eventually arrive at the tiny enclave of Plan-Lachaise. If you look up to the right here, you'll see riders in front of you that look like they're riding up a wall, and before long the road swings round to the right and you start climbing this super steep pitch. Now there's a fantastic view here back down towards Valois. Now depending on your training, altitude might start to have an effect here as we're reaching that 2,000 metre level with another 600 metres of climbing to go. When you reach Marco Pantani's memorial on the right, you're at 2,301 metres above sea level and with just 4 kilometres to the summit. In past Marmottes, I've always struggled on this section before I've recovered on the descent, and to be honest, I think that has been the altitude. 1 kilometre to the summit and you pass the tunnel entrance on your right as the road splits to the left, and this is the final grind up to the summit. Now on the Col de Galibier summit, I've been up there over a dozen times, and even in a heat wave in July I've had to put a gilet on for the descent. If you're looking for another challenge in the Alps this summer, I got to ride the 3 sides of Ventoux in a day. The challenge is called the Cingles de Mont Ventoux, and you can see more about that in this video. Now there's more bakeries than feed zones, however it is an epic day out. If the video spikes your interest to take on the Cingles de Mont Ventoux, you can drop me an email and that's in the description down below. Straight from the off, it's a narrow descent, and whilst it's not too technical, problems are evident, as you can see from the ambulance here. Far below you can see the buildings at the Col de Sarenne junction. That's where we're aiming for, and it's 8 kilometres down to that point. Past the exit of the tunnel and straight in front of you before the first left-hand bend is the monument to Henri Lagrange, the founder of the Tour de France. That's on your right. Arriving at the Col de Sarenne junction, it's a right turn and the road is a lot wider here as it's one of the main roads that stays open in the winter. It's a long sweeping descent now to the foot of the Col de Sarenne, and there's 2 key points for this section. Number 1, it's again critical to be in a group as it's often a headwind. Now you can see from this footage that even though this was my 4th Marmotte, I made the mistake of not waiting, and it wasn't until after the ski village of Le Grave that the peloton formed and made life a lot easier. Secondly, there's a series of tunnels on this section, and over the years, whilst the lighting's improved dramatically, it's always one to be wary of as there has been incidents previously. Now it's a long descent down to the Sarenne junction from the Galibier summit and can be broken down into 2 sections. As I mentioned earlier, it's 8 kilometres from the Galibier summit to the Sarenne junction, and then another 24.5 kilometres down to the Col de Sarenne junction, and it's certainly one where you don't want to be on your own. And we're on to the Col de Sarenne, so this is nearly the final climb. 12.73 kilometres to the summit, climbing 974 metres to top out at 1,995 metres. The climb was last used as an ascent in the 2017 Critérium du Dauphiné when the Isle of Man's Little Peak Kenyuk took the win. Now unfortunately I have no clips of the ascent of the Col de Sarenne, and winter's already arrived, as you can see behind me here, with all the high cols already closed. So we'll revisit that in the spring and have a detailed look. However, stick with me as I do have some clips as we go over the top of the Sarenne and head towards Alpe D'Huez. So if you've made it this far, you're now at the summit of the Sarenne and you're heading in the Alpe D'Huez direction. It's definitely not flat though. Here we're looking down the initial descent towards Alpe D'Huez. The road's narrow and the surface isn't great. Now I recall there was some debate back in 2013 as to whether the road should be resurfaced for the Centenary 2013 Tour. It wasn't, and I'm not aware that it has been since. There's some odd patches where the tarmac's been repaired. You can see from the footage that the camera's bouncing around as we're on this initial 3-kilometre descent from the summit before climbing a further and final 150 metres in altitude over the next 3 kilometres before dropping down into Alpe D'Huez and over the finish line. So there it is, possibly the toughest Etape du Tour on record. However, at least the logistics are a lot easier than in recent years. So I'll see you on the start line next July. Good luck with your training over the winter months, and as usual, if you do have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Cycling in the Alps.